call you Ben? BR sounds like a dumb thing to say in person, right?
Right. It's weird. God, I try to keep like a level of weird anonymity just because things are a little weird. But yeah, no, that should be good. That's fine.
Fair enough. No, it like looks good on a book jacket and so forth. I understand the appeal. So I don't know if you've watched any of these other ones. I have like the free Zoom, and I sort of purposefully am not upgrading to have these cut off at 40 minutes. But that means I feel like I should just start asking you some questions.
Cool, that works. That sounds good.
Awesome. So I've written something about you here. I'm just gonna read it out loud, and we'll go from there. You are the author of Negative Space, Burn You the Fuck Alive, Pearl Death, and Amygdalatropolis. I don't know if I've said that correctly, but each of these books, and we can argue whether your experimental horror slash fantasy deck of cards called Pearl Death is actually a book. But each of these books starts with a premise that feels wholly recognizable to anyone who's grown up in a small town and had access to drugs and a computer, and who experienced some combination of angst, anxiety, depression, and terror in their youth. Meaning most of the post-millennial population who inhabit the United States or elsewhere. I've had so many conversations with people over the past few years who have mentioned your novel Negative Space as being one of, if not the best, examples of contemporary horror. And the evidence for this perhaps being true is that Negative Space has become an absolute cult sensation, and to my knowledge, sold tens of thousands of copies, way beyond what seems reasonable for a bleak horror novel released on a small press. My feeling is that this has something to do with your ability to craft characters and settings that feel wholly real and lived in, and then drag them into the abyss. Meaning your books are immersive, violent, frightening, and while you skirt the edge of experimental literature, you also have a clean cinematic style of writing that seems primed for commercial success. And honestly, I'd love to witness that, if for no other reason than I want to see like a film adaptation of Negative Space. Suffice to say, I'm a big fan of your work. That said, I don't really know that much about you, so I'd just like to start to find out a little bit about how you got here. I mean, the where are you from question is maybe stupid. You don't really need to answer that, but how did you get involved in the small press scene? And is the success of Negative Space a fluke in your eyes, or did you have a feeling this was going to resonate with people in such a massive way?
Hmm. Well, for the first part, it was just kind of by accident, essentially. Like I didn't know too much about there being any type of small press scene or anything until I was starting to like look at like publishing, or definitely didn't know anything about like a I knew that there were like writing communities and such, but like none of it was really, very little of it like resonated aesthetically with me. Like it was a lot of kind of the typical stuff that you see where it's just kind of like, here's, a poem about, getting a little bit older in my 20s, or like here's like it's like, I guess like what typically gets like skewed as like MFA literature, or like it was just all stuff that's kind of like was like boring to me.
Did you
And
get an you mentioned MFA literature? Are you from that like academic
no,
world? Not at all.
no, not at all, not at all. No, it, I don't even know what I mean when I'm like saying that. It's just like it just was like I wasn't really finding a lot of stuff that was like resonating for me until I started digging more into like discovering Schism Press and things that were associated with that, like Gary J. Shipley, who runs Schism Press, or Eugene Thacker had this book, An Ideal for Living, that was really, really resonant and had a big influence on me. And find that was just essentially my way into it. And it was pretty much through first publishing Amygdalatropolis that I encountered like John Treffry, who runs Inside the Castle, and
Got
started like
it.
learning about some of the kind of the weirder stuff that was happening, and finding other writers who with work that was resonating with me. Um, so yeah, it was really just kind of by accident. It wasn't it wasn't really until I started actually publishing books that I discovered that there was actually a scene that was happening. And
I feel
yeah.
like that's kind of common. And even as you say this, I had no fucking idea that Gary Shipley runs Schism. I
Oh,
just
word, yeah.
read my first book of his recently. It blew my fucking mind.
Which one?
It's I think the most recent one on Apocalypse Party, So Beautiful and Elastic.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd seen his name pop up and people have recommended it to me in the past, but I think I saw Dennis Cooper post something about that, like in an interview. And yeah, I mean, this happens to me continually where like I'll be like, oh, I don't know, I've seen that name around. And then I realize that person's written like 6 books, 7,
Mm.
something like that. And they're kind of amazing. And they're people who, yeah, the greater population knows nothing about. I mean, I don't know. I find this, I'm sure there's other people like you. I feel like you're like this weird it, in between author, meaning like, there's like everyone, like there's Stephen King and everyone who comes from the big five presses, and I don't know who the equivalent of that is now, but then there's like 1,000 people at the bottom on these small presses, and you seem to have sort of like gotten in this weird middle ground where a lot of people I am talking to are really familiar with, but probably like the average person still doesn't know who you are, right?
Right, right. Yeah, like the idea of like, I mean, the sheer idea of being in that middle area seems like really weird to me because it doesn't it's that's all been like very surreal. I guess to answer the second part of your question, I did not expect really any of this level of success. I do think that a lot of it is right place at the right time. It just happened to be something that like resonated with people at the time. But I mean, trying to like trying to like make too much out of that is like the path of madness.
All
Like,
right, yeah. Well,
yeah,
fuck it
absolutely.
then. So who were you reading prior to getting with Schism Press? Um,
Mm.
like what was, because I don't know. I feel like my influences were more or less mainstream until I discovered smaller presses, and that's probably true for everyone. And then you kind of get involved in this world, and maybe it gets more diffuse. But like, who are you reading prior to putting out your first novel?
So Dennis Cooper was a big one,
Okay.
as everyone talks
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
I want to give a shout out to my buddy Rebecca, who when like almost 20 years ago, she really put me on to when we were like both like 21. She was really putting me onto a lot of like extreme and transgressive fiction. Like she got me into Cows by Matthew Stokoe, and that had like a really
Right.
big effect on me. The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, which was another one. She may have been the one person who got me into Dennis Cooper, but it was prior to that. I was reading a lot of, like Bret Easton Ellis, but also a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy, like a lot of Philip K. Dick. I love Clive Barker. Geek Love was a big book for me. Before then, like really like a lot of normie stuff. Like I went through a big period of reading like classic British literature, like Jane
Sure.
Austen and like Dickens and stuff. So it's just been like a really wide variety, and it's hard to think about like where. I guess I was revisiting for like around Megalotropolis. Was revisiting a lot of Edgar Allan Poe and like a lot of that stuff. So I wasn't even really like I didn't really know a lot about what was going on in small presses or anything like before I was involved. And now that's such a good big chunk of what I read.
Sure, sure. Okay, well let's like talk about a little bit what these books are about. And I know like a lot of people I've been chatting with recently don't really want to traipse into that territory too much because I think there's like a like style is king idea, especially
Mm.
among small press writers or whatever. But
I think a little bit of that is bullshit, though. I put style like pretty high up. I
yeah,
always want to kind of push back on that though, because so much of the stuff that I end up reading that's by like people who are like style is king. It's like, yeah, but it's fucking empty in there. There's like, yeah, there's nothing beyond the surface. So
So what
I'm
is
all about balances with things, but
okay? I mean,
yeah.
because and that makes sense reading your shit. I mean, it is I haven't entirely reread Negative Space recently, but in the past week or so, I kind of got through half of it. And it's funny because I remember this as being kind of like a narrative heavy book, and yet going through it so far, I mean, it's like, it's told from the perspective of several characters and you kind of bounce back and forth between them. But I think what a lot of people I've talked to about your stuff recognize instantly is like all these people seem like kids we knew or were ourselves like in high school, right? I mean, I just got through a chapter like a couple nights ago where they're like at essentially like a noise show in someone's basement and like this guy's like cutting his fucking wrist and the strobes are going off and they're on this like hallucinatory drug that a lot of this book is about. And I mean, my best guess is that like you lived this. Otherwise, I don't understand how you'd write shit like that, right?
Right. So
So I'm 38 years old. I'm gonna guess you're within 10 years of me, one way or the other. Is that
I'm 39, turning 40
okay?
this year. Yeah.
But okay, so that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. And even Amygdalatropolis is so much about. Well, I wrote a whole thing here, and maybe I can recount that, but maybe it's not really important. It's about message boards, and it's about like 4chan culture essentially, and probably like the worst parts of that. And it really like it seems to suggest this very specific place and time in internet culture, which is like our generation, right? Where we're all on there like discussing the banality of our lives and drugs and music, but also trading like snuff films and videos of sex crimes and kind of after a while it became like not that big of a deal, and I think that's already changed pretty drastically with TikTok and so forth. But I don't know, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like your youth, I feel like, has to be informing this to a certain degree.
Sure. Yeah, I was absolutely an indoor kid. I was very much, again, this was all like in my teens. Obviously, this was like poor pre 4chan or 8chan or any of those things. But I was on Ogreish, as Live Leak eventually evolved into and stuff, and
I
I
don't
was.
even know what that is.
Oh, do you know Live Leak?
I don't, I'm sorry.
It pitches itself as just kind of like sort of completely uncensored videos and stuff, and as it pitches itself as kind of like, here's like an uncensored news source, you can find unedited like combat footage and stuff. It was
Got it.
previously Ogreish, which was just kind of a straight unapologetically as like a gore site, kind of a contemporary with Ron.com. Ron.com obviously was prior to that. um but no, I was I was online a lot. I was very lonely. I had friends and stuff, but like I felt like kind of apart from people in general. So I was lurking online for huge swaths of my teen years. And a lot of Amygdalatropolis is kind of transplanting sort of some like thoughts and like that. I don't even know what to say. It was taking like some of the lived experience of that and then moving that into what was happening more in the past 10 years with like the advent of like 8chan and kind of more communities surrounding antisocial behavior and like doxing and lolcow and stuff. But yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting thing to explore and try to document essentially. But I think maybe to answer your question, like I have a really hard time like writing from a perspective that I can't that. I haven't been around or experienced. So like a lot of I'm drawing from either my own personal experiences. A lot I'm also drawing from those of my friends or people that I know. I'm not sure if that makes sense or answers your question.
It does. I mean, I think so. Okay, well, I want to ask you something in that realm because recently you were incredibly kind enough to write a blurb for my new book, and thank you.
Oh, it's fantastic. My pleasure.
Out loud.
I love that.
Well, so so when we're talking about like your work or my work, I think people know of your stuff a little bit more than mine, but I think there are similarities, even if you're just going to talk about the content, which for the most part deals with like pretty heavy themes of like suicidal ideation, like extreme violence and sexuality, etc. I mean, even in your most recent collection, Burn You the Fuck Alive. I mean, the opening story is basically about like two people who reignite their relationship by like torturing someone in their basement who may or may not be like a sex offender, right? And it is incredibly compelling. And you said something in a DM to me, and I don't know if I was just reading into this or not, and I can't even remember exactly the way you worded it, but something I've been grappling with myself. It's not the morality of this stuff or even whether or not it should be on the page. Like I think probably for the rest of my life, I'm going to be interested in extreme horror and books and films that have been labeled quote unquote transgressive, which is maybe a stupid term at this point, but that was something to categorize this for maybe the last 20 years. And yet as I get older and some of my sort of attention it switches to like creating a life for myself in the future. I've started to, and I think my recent book grapples with this, is like I started to look at like, well, is some of that like more of a sincere expression of me just recycling through these sort of like trauma porn things that have happened to me, and like is that really a good thing to keep doing? Or I don't even good, but it's like I came to this point a couple of years ago, especially with my past in pornography, which I realized through some therapy and other stuff had fucked me up way more than I had realized. And I've had to sort of process that in a pretty extreme way. You said at the end of the book, which I think is probably the most hopeful thing I've written, that you had been talking to other people and about similar themes or ideas. And I was just curious, does any of that resonate with you, or is this all kind of bullshit
Yeah.
affectation or aesthetics for you, or what?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think what really struck me, I think that this time, correct me if I'm wrong, I read it as connecting with your experiences with in the porn industry, the way that you um the function of violence that I see in your work is often, it seems to be about the submitting oneself to be destroyed by others, essentially.
Yeah.
As a like particularly that there's that first story in creation, um and like throughout it just seems to be like a thread about um giving oneself over as like a possession, to like give, like allowing oneself to become a possession to be destroyed, essentially. Which I've like read that, like I've interpreted that as being sort of about experience of the whole idea of like body to job and such, and like the way that that you've kind of pushed back on like the liberatory aspects or rhetoric or around sex work and pornography,
Right.
um, which I think is really interesting. I think that you know I- what you're talking about in terms of like kind of questioning the impulse to explore like violence and like transgressive themes and stuff. That's something that I wrestle with too. And but like I think one thing I've been kind of like realizing, I think that violence in fiction can be very interesting as a way of trying to understand someone or try to like know them further in a way. Um, I think that, I can see that in your work. That's what what I'm like trying to do of I'm not sure if any of that is making sense. I'm getting over
Yeah.
COVID, so I'm not sure
Yeah,
how coherent
totally.
I'm being, but no, I've been kind of questioning that impulse too. I think with like this last collection of short stories, it has been kind of I've talked about before. It's kind of me hitting the wall with like a lot of the more um, you know using extremity in the way that I've been using it like previously. Like it's start like I need to be doing something else a little bit in addition to that.
Fair enough. And I don't even know what the answer to these questions are. And it sounds like silly for me sometimes to even like say some of this shit out loud because at the end of the day, like I really don't have any sensorial impulse or want to tell anyone you shouldn't be thinking about this and that's not really what I'm after. I guess it's sort of like for me going through this last book is really about just recognizing like a pattern of writing the same thing about myself over and over, which was
Hmm.
I think very like just a self-destructive story or something like that.
Hmm.
And in your stuff, yeah, I don't know. I think for people, I'm gonna guess for people like yourself, and it's certainly true for me, like writing and being interested in transgressive subject matter to a certain point, like I hit my threshold maybe with like Peter Sotos, and at this point, I can't read stuff like that anymore. It really affects me in an incredibly emotional way, which I'm not. I just don't want to live there anymore.
Oh yeah, it kind of like breaks down your capacity to feel joy in a way, which is, I think, an incredible artistic accomplishment. And it's I'll still read his stuff because I think that it's really interesting. But I think I got through half of Mist better still. I'm just like, this is just kind of making me miserable. I get what he's doing as being very,
Sure.
very effective, as really well done, but I'm tapping out. But
Yeah.
yeah, but no, I think 100%. Like I hear you in terms of not wanting to like dictate or say that anything is like wrong or not. I think anything in fiction is absolutely fine. It's more, um, I start to wonder whether or not I'm using that as a crutch, or if sometimes I'm like wondering like what is the purpose of going this far. I was having a similar conversation with my filmmaker friend Nick, who's working on his new film that previously he's done like horror stuff, and this one he's not. He's doing have like this intense family drama thing, and we talk a lot about the power of scaling back emotion, or like pulling back. And even when I'm trying to writing kind of extreme stuff, I try to pull back a little bit, because I think that that's can be a bit more powerful if like it's if it doesn't accelerate to sort of like someone getting killed, or like there being a risk of physical violence. Like how do you just sit with the emotions and of a
Mhm.
situation and make that artistically compelling and truthful, um like without necessarily like resorting to just like then he takes out the knife or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I I do want to switch over real quick. Hold on, I'm gonna read this out loud. You sent me a screener for a movie called Sweet Relief.
Yeah.
It's an indie horror film that you star in as a corrupt cop who plays a role in a kind of bizarre and violent TikTok trend. And I have to say, your character is probably the most memorable in the film. And I have to ask, whose idea was the wardrobe choices, and what's going on with you in this indie horror film scene? Is this relatively new?
Yeah, so that was a collaborative. The wardrobe was a collaborative effort between me and my friend Nick, who's working on this new film, who directed it, Nick Verdi. Um, yeah, we went to like Walmart and stuff and just kind of picked out like shoes. It was coming from his vision, like he wanted big chunky shoes for it. He had a lot of ideas for his like more relaxed kind of like Hawaiian shirt look.
Uh,
One of his rules was buy everything a size too small for me, so I'm just like bursting out of it at all times. But in terms of being involved with like the indie film scene, like I'm not. My involvement pretty much goes to me working with my friend Nick Verdi, who's working on his third feature right now, and I think I can say actually his previous two films, Sweet Relief and Caucasoid, just got picked up for distribution, um, which we're stoked about.
oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
But there's stuff that's happening like I'm forgetting his name, but this guy Kyle who just did a I forget his last name, but he has a GoFundMe going for this film Compliance that I read the script for. That looks really, really cool. He did a the short film Annihilator. That's really cool. I know that there's this writer and filmmaker, Jesse Gaston, who is doing stuff as well. So that's the extent of knowledge is just like people who I happen to be
Fair enough.
around or see, but it does seem like that I'm hoping for a major like studio system collapse, and a bunch of people like my buddy, this guy Kyle and Jesse, are and people like that are able to kind of like traipse through it and like build something cool and beautiful now that everything in cinema and TV kind of fucking sucks right now.
Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts regarding all that because I remember, okay, maybe this is like 10 years ago, and I was still very, very much into cinema. I went to
Hmm.
film school. It was even prior to writing books, I think was my emphasis and my dream, and that's pretty much switched over the past
Hmm.
decade. But I remember talking to a friend of mine who was then hanging out with probably Gen Z kids. They couldn't have been younger because this is 10 years ago. Anyway, it was all these like people who seemed like interesting into cool music, etc. Stuff that I would have been into at their age. And yet they didn't give a fuck about movies. Like movies were for old people. And since the pandemic, I stopped going to the theater. And I think that's a pretty normal thing among people I see my age and especially younger. And I got to a point where like I also don't give a fuck about movies. So when you sent me the screener, for a moment I was like, God, I don't even watch this shit anymore. I got to sit down for 2 hours and like put this on. And then it was, watching that movie and seeing like some of the energy of people who are interested in like independent film was really exciting. And I gotta say, like I got through it in one go, which for me is not usual to say the least by today's standards. And so I think you're right that I mean, we all see this, like theaters are collapsing across the country. There are movies on Netflix and HBO or whatever the fuck this is called now, Max.
Yeah.
But it's all like
It all fucking
it all
sucks.
fucking well, yeah, well, it's all because the only things that make money, right, are like tentpole franchises. And I think that's not even true anymore. Like the
Yeah.
fact that Marvel puts out a TV show or film now every 2 weeks, like there's nothing to be excited about, even if you're like from that mainstream fandom. Um, so I'm curious, like, it is interesting. I don't know if Nick is your age or younger, but it is interesting to me to see people, I can't say we're young anymore, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
who are not part of the studio system actually going out and doing shit because is there like a indie film circuit still? I mean, there must be if you're talking about these movies getting distributed and watched in any capacity.
Yeah, so it's been really inspiring seeing what how Nick has navigated things, like especially up until getting this distribution deal, because the way that he was doing it, and I was always kind of like pushing on like more of the business side. It's like, oh, here's like this service that will get it up on Tubi and stuff like that. And he was like, no, I just, he was always saying like, I just want to have control of this, and like, if the only way that people are seeing it is by us like renting out theaters and doing screeners ourselves, or just DMing people like a
Yeah.
private link or something. He like really preferred it to be that way than you know trying to sort of play the business side of things. And I thought that that was just very, very inspiring to see, of just kind of like being satisfied with it, not like not trying to get to the next big thing or something like that, and trying to keep it a bit more intimate. So it's he's shown it at like a lot of film festivals. That's been like across the country. I think it's been coast to coast at this point. um but like I think that that's where it's really happening. One thing I am always kind of lamenting is that there isn't really a Bandcamp equivalent to cinema or something.
Right.
I was talking with someone about how Vimeo was first like kind of pitching itself as that, but they kind of like screwed up on that end. And like with like YouTube, it's like it's not really the place that you like go to for cinema. There's not really a specific um service to view specifically just cinema, not video,
Yeah.
online, that is accessible to independent filmmakers. So I think that that's one of the things that like holds people back. But at the same time, if you're just accepting that, like it's about like having these screeners at like film festivals, or just sending people a link or something like that, then I think that's a really cool way of going about it. And some it's just kind of a matter of like adjusting expectations. uh
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a prominent figure in my new book, her name's Luca.
yes,
She's a
yes.
producer on this web series that still isn't out. It's called The Lovers, and
Hmm.
she talked to me about, because I was like, like it looked pretty good. They showed me the title sequence. I ended up actually redoing a couple of the graphics for them, but
Hmm.
um I was like, yeah, are you trying to get it on, with this network or blah, blah, blah. And there's even this kind of like very little known like queer streaming service called Reverie that I've worked on a couple of projects for. But Luca and the main filmmaker, her name's Daviel, were like really, really what is the word? I mean, they don't want to give it to anyone
Hmm.
because there's something, I guess, happening now. Even if you have like a show on like HBO and you license it to them, they can just take it off eventually, and
Yep.
then you don't have the rights to show this anymore, and it basically like disappears from the world.
Yep.
And they really want control over that. And I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know that I would feel the same. Well, I don't know. It's been a while since I put that much effort into like a visual medium like that. But it's interesting to talk to filmmakers now to see like where their heads are at, because it's completely fucking changed, right, in the past
Yeah.
decade or whatever. So I'm also curious, like what, like you're talking about what the equivalent is to Bandcamp or something like that. And I don't know the answer, but it was fun for me to see that movie just DM'd to me and be like, oh, this is actually fucking good. This isn't like someone's bullshit project. Like they obviously put a lot of work into this. And I don't know the distribution strategy. I think with books right now, that's been exciting to me since being involved with the small press scene, just to see how people operate there. Although I think I go back and forth with being really excited and then overwhelmed, because it is a massive time commitment to read someone's novel. And
Yeah.
when you see so many talented people pouring out stuff where but you got to get to 200-300 pages of everyone, that takes several months. I don't know.
Absolutely. Like you really have to kind of like be like, okay, I'm going to focus on these 5 to like 10 people.
Yeah.
And like, you know, because there is so much, and like a lot, you know, a lot of it's really great. But it is interesting. I think just going back just to like pontificate a little bit, I think you know, I like really love like what your friend and that was saying about like wanting to keep the ownership of it, and like, you know, not just trying to like sell it to someone, because I think that like there's like so many corners of different aspects of media that are like so focused on the fact that the institutions are collapsing or that the institutions suck now, and you see that with like like bitter writers who are upset that, you know, mainstream publishing sucks right now, when there's this entire like world out there underneath and everything. Like you'll just like have like see like conversations about, it's like, oh well, you know, it's like, you know, someone like Cormac McCarthy could never like start out like today or anything. It's like, yeah, they fucking could. They would probably just be self-published or an indie press, and
Yeah.
that's okay. That's like, that's, you know, it's like the mid-level like writer, or like the low-level writer has been cleared out. It's like, no, there's just more of them now. They're doing indie presses and like self-publishing, but like people like get really caught up with like sort of like wanting to have institutional respect, and it just seems like a bullshit trap.
I agree. I mean, I see this thing happen where even people on small presses are being like, "Did you know that like no one makes money on these things?" You're like, "Yeah, yeah, of course." Or like I see writers say this thing like, "How to write a book while you have a full-time job" or something. You're like, if this isn't fucking new, and that's like everyone in the goddamn world other than like 5 people at the top.
Right, absolutely. It's like that's everyone. That's like we're all in. You like, you figure out a way to make it work if it's something you want to do. You
Oh,
know,
of
that's all there is
course.
to it. And like, you know, just because, you know, the institutions suck now doesn't mean that you would have been more like your rugged hyper masculine book. It doesn't mean that would have like gotten like published like in the 70s either. Like, you know, it's like, who
Yeah.
knows? Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, there are examples of that, but when you trace this back far enough, it's just like relationships, or, you know,
Right.
this person had money or what, I don't know. I mean, there's a rare exception here and there, but
Right.
anyway, we have like 2 minutes left because of my free Zoom. Is anything you want to plug or mention last minute here?
Oh, damn.
I know this just fucking went by. I feel like
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate this, and congrats on having the book out. It's like, it's really
Thank you.
terrific. I really, you know, was really loved it. It like really resonated a lot. It hit a lot of like, you know, close marks with me. But
I,
yeah,
I
thank
thank you
you so
so
much
much,
for
man.
doing this. And you know,
Yeah.
I've got books, and I'm in a couple of movies that are going
Yeah.
to be having distribution, like TBD. Um, but like, you know, otherwise, I think that's it.
All right, well, fuck yeah. I mean, look, the question everyone gets asked at the end is like, "What's up next?" And I'm just gonna assume you have a novel or something in the next year or two coming out, and we'll be patient. But I'm looking forward to it.
You got it right there, absolutely. And you know, I'm hoping for another next year or two,
Okay.
probably 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean
But
that's
yeah,
fair. That's
and
probably good.
yeah, how about yourself? Or do you have I know
Yeah,
you just climbed the mountain, but
same fucking thing. Like, you know, there's something in the works, and I don't know the timeline. I'm gonna say probably another 2 to 3 years before something's released, but that seems appropriate.
awesome.
Yeah.
Tight. All
All right, man. Well, thanks so much.
right,
I'll talk to you soon.
much appreciated. Thank you. Take
All right.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.